I'm Mike, and these are my friends Joe and Nick,
Hey.
and you are finally watching the third episode of goodgriefz. So, after a long absence from griefing, during which we tried our hardest to make it big with projects that don't involve destroying the digital creations of small children, I approached Joe with the question that had been haunting us all for months. Could we pull off one last grief? And Joe was like, I'm getting too old for this shit. So we set out to find our next target, and to see if our way of griefing without hacks or cheats was even possible anymore. After all, so much had changed since we had been gone. Even the Minecraft launcher was different. After a whole host of problems trying to migrate our Minecraft usernames to Mojang accounts, because that's apparently a thing now, we finally found something promising. A fairly large server by the name of DuffCraft, who are apparently back after some kind of absence. How fitting for our griefing return. A quick visit to the forums on their site revealed that these mods are apparently a little ban happy, banning players for minor offenses like an 11-year-old girl who didn't replant crops, or tons of other kids who didn't actually grief anything. This meant we would need to be extra careful, nothing a little camouflage couldn't fix. So Joe and I scoped the server out, and it's a beauty. Right at spawn is this huge rainbow which just screams, please grief this server! Unfortunately, the rainbow itself is protected, as is a small area around spawn, but outside of that small area, it's pretty much a free-for-all. Even the chests aren't protected. So we bring in Nick and set ourselves up in a small desert village, because the boys, they're back in town. We start with our usual routine, playing actual Minecraft and ingratiating ourselves with the locals. And let me tell you, this server, it's got some characters. First, there's Dallas. If DuffCraft was a Walmart, then Dallas is the greeter, greeting everyone who enters the server with a welcome back, regardless of how long they have been gone. Whether you logged off for 2 seconds or 2 years, you get a WB. So naturally, we started greeting Dallas with a WB as well, when he hadn't ever left. And being the perfect gentleman, he responded to all WBs with a kind TY. And then there's this guy, who we'll simply call the Russian for reasons I'll explain in a minute. He joins the server and immediately asks, this name doesn't mean anything appropriate, right? And apparently he's a server regular who was hacked and had his username changed. So of course we inform him that Hekeku is a very inappropriate slur and that we are very offended. So some of the locals start Googling Hekeku to see what this slur means, and the Russian claims that all that comes up is a bunch of Russian sites. So of course we tell him it's a Russian slur, and he actually offers to leave the server if it is. And then, amazingly, somebody else in the server decides to Google Hekeku using Russian characters, and even more amazingly, it actually translates to a word, non-sex. We did it ourselves, and it checks out. So they come to the independent conclusion that it must be a Russian slur for queer or trans folk. We'll chalk this one up as a successful psychological grief. Now, at the same time that all of the Russian slur drama is going down, a player by the name of Little Pimpin' starts causing more ruckus in the server. He slinks some minor insults and even admits to griefing a big base near spawn. So we're all like, thank you griefing gods for the free scapegoat? And we try to direct all attention to Little Pimpin'. Finally, a mod signs in, and the Kit Kat bar explains that she has been grieferinoed, which is our new favorite term. Apparently the mod only has jailing abilities and can't ban the little devil, so he is thrown in this public jail at spawn, where everyone gathers to stare at him like a thief in the town stockade. But instead of logging off, he just keeps taunting everybody in the server. It was like they were his executioners, asking if he had any last words, and he just spat in their faces. Eventually the mods muted him, and he still hung around for a while, just staring at his tormentors before finally logging off. To be completely honest, we could make an entire video just about the characters in this server and our interactions with them. But that's not why you're here, is it? You're here to see us destroy something beautiful, but before we get to that, I do need to introduce one last character, J-Dog Duffy. J-Dog Duffy is the creator and owner of the server, hence the name DuffCraft. Up to this point in our grief, he had yet to make an appearance, and we just caught little references to him in the chat, like, somebody get J-Dog when something bad would happen in town. At one point, Joe tried to impersonate him by changing his username to JDog420 in an effort to find out the location of some good targets, but the entry text gave him away. Nick tried the same thing as J-Dog Duffy with 3 Fs, but again, entry text sold him out. We'll come back to that. Anyway, while all of this was going on, we were diligently gathering resources for our grief. But because of the size of the server, our limited manpower, our refusal to use hacks, and the server's ban-happy mods, we were unsure how much of a dent we could actually make before we would be booted for good. So we formed a backup plan. a doomsday device, or a bunch of sand blocks on top of powered pistons to create as much block movement as possible in hopes of crashing the server. The idea was that if we felt a ban was imminent, one of us would quickly teleport back to the doomsday device and set it off, crashing the server for everyone before the mods had a chance. We knew this was a powerful server, so we knew the doomsday device had to be big, but like a real doomsday device, you can only use it once, so we couldn't be sure if we had gone big enough until it was actually time to set it off. So back to J-Dog. Without warning, as we're just about to start griefing, he signs in. And we're like, the doomsday clock? It's at midnight. It's now or never. So I warp back to the doomsday device and set it off, and nothing. No server crash, and the device is only half powered. It's only after watching the footage now that I realize I had the redstone wired all wrong, but who knows if it would have worked anyway on a server this size. So as we're arguing about whether to start griefing now before he bans us, or playing it cool until he leaves in case he's not here to ban us, he logs off. So it's officially go time. Nick plants a few signs around one of the towns trying to implicate Dallas in our griefing, and then we all meet at this big colored sheep farm for the silence of the lambs. After the slaughter, we meet Joe at a big town he discovered. It's too big to take it all down, so we pick our targets, starting with the town hall, where there is apparently a vote taking place to name the town. So naturally, we interfere and provide some new choices on the ballot. There's also a wall of banned players, so we add Dallas and the boys to the list, but mostly Dallas. Then we tear everything but the ballot boxes and wall of shame down, and tree the foundation to prevent rollbacks. As we're scoping out our next target, Joe and I find a house with a ton of unlocked chests and a dog kennel. So we looted the chests for griefing materials, and as for the dogs, well, just look for yourself. While Joe and I are doing things that will haunt our dreams forever, Nick gets a user named Aircat to lead him to what he thinks is their house. But as Nick starts some light griefing, we find out that this is actually J-Dog's house. So we warp to Nick and start ripping it apart, but no sooner are we able to realize that this place is enormous before J-Dog himself logs on and quickly bans Joe and Nick for griefing. Unsure if he plans to ban me too, I hit him with a WB J-Dog, to which he says, TY, letting me know I'm good before he signs back off. Now, other griefers might have given up at this point. Our doomsday device failed horribly, and 2/3 of us have been banned after barely scraping the tip of the griefing iceberg. But not us. Joe logs back in with a spare username we kept from our glory days, and Nick reaches out on Twitter to see if anybody is willing to lend us their username for the night. And amazingly, someone is. A Twitch streamer named Malayla, who will forever be a goodgriefz MVP. And thus, we begin again. Ride some forbidden horses before killing them, redo some town signs, upside down crosses, murder a lot of animals. And then we come across the mother of all farms. Layers upon layers upon layers of farm, all the way down to bedrock. This farm is literally so big that we have to stop and ask ourselves, how do we grief this? There's only 3 of us, and this could take hours. But then it hits us. The way the irrigation system is set up, if we flood the farm with their own water and then dig random holes wherever we can, all of the crops will be washed away and will need to be replanted. And the cleanup will be a real doozy, having to find out just where we dug all these holes that the water is seeping through. For good measure, we destroy as many chests as we can find, and lava the contents. And then Joe builds a beautiful goodgriefz sign set against a backdrop of upside down crosses, so there can be no mistaking who was responsible. By this time it's 4 in the morning, and it doesn't look like anybody is coming back online to ban us, so we wrap up our grief with some minor vandalism and call it a night. When we try to log back in the next day, we're all obviously banned. So I log in with another spare username to do some recon, and as I'm making my way back to the town we griefed to see if they were able to roll it all back, the players in the chat start talking about the grief, claiming that they were griefed by a group of like 70 people last night. Somebody else walks that number down to 15, but still, there were only 3 of us, so we're flattered. Back at town, I see that they've rolled back everything we didn't tree up, but nearly all of the animals are still gone. Although, yes, for those concerned, the dogs are actually okay. The rollbacks also meant that the contents of the chest we destroyed were returned to a previous state, so there are still some things missing. Town Hall was treed pretty well, so that grief held up beautifully, and though they were able to roll back our surface damage at the farm, it looks like they haven't even realized what we did underneath, as the entire thing is still a flooded mess. So that's pretty much the story of our griefing return. It wasn't always pretty, and it didn't go exactly as planned. In fact, it was a pretty sloppy job from a bunch of old griefing has-beens. Sometimes you have to lose the battle to win the war. And in the end, we made 3 men feel like 70. More importantly, we learned a valuable lesson, that it's going to take an army of boys in order to properly grief the next server. Next time on Good Griefs.